Hi and welcome to another Watch Geek video. Today we'll be taking a look at a couple of vintage pieces from Rolex and Tudor and compare the two. This will be the first time I feature both of these brands on my channel, although not the first time I'm handling Rolex. The question to answer today is, can a Tudor be better than a Rolex? When it comes to new watches, it's pretty clear how they're placed in the market. Rolex is the one to have if you're successful, and Tudor is for those who didn't get there just yet. I mean, that is how some people will look at you after purchasing a Tudor. At least when it comes to models that are a copy of an existing Rolex, like the Black Bay or the Explorer. However, Tudor is capable of making their own models that are all original, and those are Tudors that I like the most. Tudor North Flag, for instance, is to me one of the best looking watches Tudor made, even though it's not generally as adored as the Black Bay. And I don't know why that is, as it is the one Tudor you can get where nobody is going to think you bought it because you couldn't afford a Rolex. When it comes to these vintage models, you have a similar story. There are Tudor models that are exact copies of Rolex, and then there are models that are slightly more original, like the one we'll cover in this video. But first, let's take a look at the Rolex. This is an Oyster Date Precision, and is considered to be one of the most affordable Rolex pieces you can get next to the Air King. Despite being the most affordable, it is a typical Rolex. You get the famous oyster case, the timeless dial design, and an in-house made reliable movement. The differences to what we're used to on a Rolex are these sword hands and the fact the movement is not automatic but rather a hand-winding movement. And although I'm a huge fan of hand-winding movements, as all my vintage pieces are hand-winding, on this I would prefer an automatic. Why? Because the oyster case comes with a screw-down crown, and a screw-down crown on a manual wind watch can be a major annoyance. Not to mention, you're more likely to cross-thread the crown tube on a watch you have to unscrew and screw in every day to wind it. But other than that, I love this thing. The dimensions might be a bit small for most people today, but I like the way this thing looks on my wrist. At 34mm and 41.5 lug to lug, it just looks perfect on my 6.9-inch wrist. And even if you have a bigger wrist and consider this small, you cannot deny that the proportions of the case are spot on. This watch just looks right in every way possible, and shows us why Rolex is so reserved when it comes to design changes. Because why change something that is so good? When it comes to the bracelet, don't expect much, as this is not a modern Rolex, meaning the bracelet is on the level of a Seiko 5. But just like my SNX 111, despite being made in a way that is considered cheap by today's standards, it does its job and is comfortable. If you're bothered by the fact it has hollow end links and a stamped clasp, you can always switch to a nice leather. Now let's take a look at this Tudor reference 7964, better known as the Prince Big Rose. It uses the oyster case made by Rolex that it proudly shows on the case back. But it doesn't have an in-house made movement, rather a movement based on the ETA 2452. It also doesn't have the recognizable design that Rolex has, and the rose logo will mean nothing to an average person, unlike the Rolex crown. So on paper, it doesn't even stand a chance. But that's only on paper. When you take this watch in your hands, your jaw drops. This thing is so beautiful with its cream white dial and the shimmering hands and markers that it makes the Rolex look cheap next to it. Then the Big Rose logo that gave it its name. It has to be one of the nicest looking logos I have ever laid my eyes on. It plays with the light and is so delicately applied that I really have to wonder why Tudor replaced it with a boring generic looking shield. The dial design is original, and I like it even more than the iconic Rolex, while the case has even better proportions as it shares the same 34mm diameter but is slightly shorter at 40mm. On the wrist, this looks even more amazing and makes even a small wrist look masculine. And that is one of the reasons I like smaller watches, as they make your wrist look big. Then the movement. Yes, it's not an in-house made movement, but unlike the Rolex, this one is automatic, meaning you won't have to unscrew the crown every day to wind it, which does save you the annoyance. In conclusion, both of these are excellent and timeless watches that will look good even 50 years from now. And although Rolex has its branding to push it ahead, if we ignore the Rolex crown, Tudor seems like a better looking and better executed watch. If you ask me, even with the branding, I would rather pick the Tudor, as it's one of the most beautiful watches I have ever handled. So even though Tudor is considered a cheaper Rolex, when it comes to these two, it really looks like a more expensive watch. Well, this completes this week's review, so thank you for watching. I hope you liked it and found it useful. If you did, please like and subscribe by pressing this button right here, and until the next video, bye.